Good morning, Year 3. Today we are going to be learning how to recognize equivalent fractions. So this lesson should be watched at the beginning of this week's maths lessons for Year 3. So watch this and then go and download the PowerPoint presentations and watch the videos, and this should give you a good introduction to that. Okay, so to help us look at equivalent fractions, I'm going to use some apples and I'm going to be cutting them up with a very sharp knife. So if you want to do this at home, then do this with your adults so that they can help you with the cutting, because as you can see it's very dangerous and we're going to be cutting very small slices, so I would hate for you to hurt yourself. Anyway, let's begin. If we look at this apple, we know that it is one whole. Here is one whole apple. So we have not got any fractions yet. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to keep that there so we can look at it, is I'm going to take another apple and I'm going to cut it exactly in half. Okay, so I have two equal pieces of apple, and we know that if I have two equal pieces, then I have made two halves, and we know that two halves makes a whole. So far so good, we know that in Year 3. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these halves and I'm going to cut it in half. Not that accurate actually, but what can we do? Okay, so I now have one half, and I also have cut this half into quarters. Now look what happens if I put these two quarters together. I've made a half again. So what can I say about equivalent fractions from what I have just done? Well, it might help to draw a bar model, so I'm going to do just that. I'm going to first of all draw my whole apple, and that's going to go here. So here I have got one whole apple. Oopsie. One apple. And then I've got my two halves, which I'm going to add to my bar model. So I've split my whole into two halves. Everyone in Year 3, I think, knows about this. So I've got one half, and I've got one half. One half, and one half. But remember, we split one into half again, so I've made quarters. So I'm going to add that onto my bar model, like this. So the first thing is we started with two halves and we cut those halves in half again, or one of them, to make four quarters. Now if I hold my half next to my two quarters, we can see that they are the same size. So what we can say is that 2 quarters is equivalent to 1 half. They are the same. And the word equivalent has the word equal in it. So we know that we can use it to say that two things are the same. We can go even further than that, and we can chop these quarters into half again. And I think we know by now that if I chop my quarters in half, then I have made, in fact I'm going to do it on both of these pieces of apples so that we can really see that it's true. There's my quarters, and there's my quarters in half. So if I've cut my 4 quarters in half, I've now made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. I have made 8ths. So I'm going to add that now onto my bar model as well. So I'm going to follow these lines down because I started with quarters, which I split in half, so I can use the quarters as a guide to draw my bar model. It's a bit wonky because I'm rushing mine, but if you wanted to do this, you could take a bit more time. Oops, I dropped my ruler. Okay. So now I broke my half. I chopped my quarters into halves again. So I made my quarters into 8ths. So I've now made 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, and 1/8. So let's see if we can explore equivalent fractions a bit more. If I put 2 of my 8ths together, we can see that that has made a quarter. And we can see that on our bar model. 2 8ths equals 1 quarter. 2 8ths and 1 quarter are equivalent fractions. They are equivalent. They are the same. Can you see any more equivalent fractions on this bar model? Maybe you want to pause the video and have a look. Okay, well I can see quite a few. I'm going to look at this half now. And if I want to see which fractions are equivalent to a half, are equal to a half, then I can look down this column, and anything that is the same size as this half square is equal to it, and they are equivalent fractions. So I can follow this down and I can see that 2 quarters is equivalent to 1/2, is equal to 1/2. They are equivalent fractions. And I can see that 1, 2, 3, 4 8ths is also equal to 1/2. I can also see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 8ths is equal to 1, 2, 3 quarters. Let's see if we can do that with our apple. Oops. So we're looking for 3 quarters. So there's 1 quarter. There's 2 quarters. And there's 3 quarters. So it makes that shape. And let's see how many 8ths there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we can make equivalent fractions out of halves, quarters, and 8ths. Let's see what happens when we start doing thirds. So I'm going to rub out my... In fact, no, I'm just going to do it below. So I'm going to take another apple now, and I'm going to cut it into thirds. And it's a bit tricky to do this because a half is just straight across the middle, but a third I have to go in at funny angles, so it's not going to be precise, but it's hopefully going to be good enough that I can show you. I'm going to put a line there and a line there. Yeah. Okay. This is my next line. This should be 1/3 and 2/3. Okay, so 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So I'm going to draw that in my bar model now, because that will help me. I'm just going to give it a bit of a clean because I've got juice on it, apple juice. Okay, so let's go down here. So it's 20 centimeters all the way, so I need to divide 20 by 3, which I know is about 6.5, about. So it's 6.5, 12, about 13, and then the last one should be 6.5 again. Yep, perfect. So I have divided my bar into 3. So already I can see it's going to be a little bit more tricky to find some equivalent fractions for my thirds. I can see that because when we were looking for equivalent fractions before, we were following the lines, so anything that came in the same boxes would be equivalent to each other. But now we've got our thirds, if I did it eighths, if I had 2 eighths, then that would be smaller than 1/3. But if I had 3 eighths, then that would be bigger than 1/3. And we can see that by looking here. So I've got my 2 eighths and I've got my 1/3, and my 1/3 is definitely bigger, isn't it? But then if I put a 3rd eighth onto my thing, so I've got 3 eighths, that's much bigger than a 3rd. So I can't find an equivalent fraction between my thirds and my eighths. Let's see if we can find one elsewhere. The same with my quarters. I can't find an equivalent fraction with my third, and we kind of know that because we know that 2 eighths is the same as 1/4, so we kind of know that. I also can't find an equivalent fraction with my half, because if we look at my half an apple, 1/3 is much, much smaller than 1/2, and 2/3 is much, much bigger. So I can't find an equivalent fraction. I can find an equivalent fraction with my whole just by putting them all together. So that's the only one I can find. So let's see if we can find any equivalent fractions for my thirds by going a different way. So I'm going to chop my third into half. And if I chop my thirds into half, I'm going to be making sixths. So let's do that on my bar model. This is a bit of a messy bar model, but it's just to give you an idea. If you download the PowerPoints, there are some much, much, much more clear and colourful bar models and fraction walls that you'll be able to use to help you. Okay. So this is my 1/6, 1/6, 1/6, 1/6, 1/6, 1/6. Okay, let's have a look. So here are my sixths. 2. Oh, you can't see down that far. How am I going to do this? I'll just pop them on there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's see if we can find some equivalent fractions. Well, already I can see that there's definitely a line that goes right through there. So that's my thirds and my sixths. And we know that really because we cut my third in half to make sixths. So what that means is that 2/6 is equivalent to 1/3. It's the same size. 2/6 is equal to the same as 1/3. After that, we run into the same problems as our thirds, don't we? But I have noticed one other line that I can follow up, and that's this one. Oopsie, that's this one. This one meets up here, doesn't it? So let's have a look what that is. That is 3/6. So if I take 1, 2, 3/6, that is equivalent to 1, 2, 3, 4/8. So let's have a look at that. I think it is. Oh, it's a bit fiddly. There's my 1, 2, 3, 4/8, and let's put them next to each other. If I put all of those together, I have got a perfect whole. I wonder why that is. Let's have a look at our bar model. So these 3/6, they run right up the middle, don't they? So 1/2, which is the same as 2/4, is also the same as 3/6. sixths. So we can say 3/6 is equal to 1/2. And we can say 3/6 is equal to 2/4. And we can say 3/6 is equal to 1/8. Okay, year 3. I'm going to leave you with that. I'd like you now to go onto the school's website and download the PowerPoint presentation, and there are some links to some videos that are going to give you even more information. And once you've done that, make sure you complete the tasks and send in all of your work to the year 3 email address. Fantastic. Okay, good luck year 3.